Good afternoon, everyone. Come on in. Just getting started. Yeah, I was going to say, I hope it's afternoon. So, my name is Mary Warner. I'm from the Morrison County Historical Society. I want to welcome you to the Creative Minnesota report launch for the economic impact of the arts, history, and culture in Morrison County. So I just want to point out we have a couple of county commissioners here, Randy Winter and Jeff Jelinski, if they could raise their hands. Now, how many of you within the audience are from arts, history, or cultural organizations in Morrison County? Please raise your hands. Big showing. Thanks for coming. So, back in the 1990s, when I served on the Five Wings Arts Council, and we have Mark Turner and Vicki, you're going to have to say your last name for me. Chipolis, thank you, from Five Wings Arts Council. I served on the Five Wings Arts Council, and the organization grants out dollars, state dollars, McKnight funds, to arts organizations in Region 5. And I was serving on this council, and we were given a study that was done that showed the economic impact of the arts across the state of Minnesota. And it was a cute little book that was put out, and it stuck with me that, that the arts community would get together and create this kind of a study to show its impact. And so that little thought stayed with me all of this time. And as I've been working in the history field, I have often wondered why we haven't gotten together as a history field and done the same thing. So this past spring, last year, I kind of talked to some of my colleagues in the history field in this area and said, hey, would you be interested if we could figure out a way to do this, to have an economic impact study done on our history sites? Well, the arts community actually saved us. Jill Moore from Great River Arts, she's in the audience, she heard about Creative Minnesota doing a series of studies. And if we wanted to, we could get involved in this study, and they would cover arts and history and culture within our area. It was a relatively inexpensive fee, and several of us organizations got together and said, all right, let's do it. And so I want to take a moment to thank the people who helped fund us, the organizations. We had Linden Hill, Great River Arts, the Lindbergh House and Museum, the Friends of the Great River Regional Library here in Little Falls, and the Morrison County Historical Society. So thank you so much for helping us to pull this information together. So now, without further ado, we have Sheila Smith here from she's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Citizens for the Arts and the Chair of Creative Minnesota. And they have compiled all of this and put it into a format that shows what our impact is. So please do welcome Sheila.
Thank you, Mary. It's been really interesting to work on this study. You'll see in a minute how Morrison County really stands out in a couple of interesting ways. First of all, I'd like to just mention the organization that I work for, Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. We lobby the legislature and Congress on behalf of the nonprofit arts, and we have over 40,000 arts advocates in Minnesota who work together to educate our elected officials to make sure they know that the arts are important to our communities, that we care about the arts, and we want the arts to be included in community planning and economic development thinking and all of the different ways that we work together to improve our communities. Mark Turner is a longtime board member of Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. Wave, Mark.
She just called me old.
I'll buy you a drink, sorry. For a long time, I had been in conversation with some of the people who run the statewide foundations about bemoaning the fact that there really wasn't any good hard data about the nonprofit arts and culture sector in Minnesota. And we all had the same complaints. It's hard to do policy making, to do planning, to educate the public and elected officials about how great the arts are if you don't have any good hard data. So we banded together to create the Creative Minnesota Project, and we've been working on it now for about 6 years. This is the 4th round of a variety of studies that we've done so far. And we are very committed to only collecting good, hard data. We don't work in fuzziness. We don't use a lot of multipliers. We just want to know the facts, because without the facts, we can't figure out how to help and improve the situation for nonprofit arts and culture organizations and artists in Minnesota. So that's what the project is about. Now, I'm going to have to go over there to advance my slides. So I'm going to try working without the microphone. Will that matter for the people filming? No, okay. So let's see how loud I can be. So as I said, the goals were to collect good, hard data, but it's also that to make sure that all of this information is available for free online at creativemn.org. So not just your county study, but the Five Wings Arts Council study, the statewide study, and the over 50 other studies that we have completed to date are all available for free and download there. There's also a couple of fun interactive maps where you can look up your own county in relation to other counties in things such as creative worker wages or density of the artist population and all kinds of interesting stuff. So I encourage you to visit that. So first we're going to talk a little bit about artists and creative workers and give you a little statewide context. There's 104,000 artists and creative workers in Minnesota. So what is an artist and creative worker? Well, first of all, we only included those people who make a living full-time or part-time in one of 41 creative occupations. These are the 41 occupations that we studied. The data that we're using is from federal sources. The jobs are classified in different ways by the federal government. We just pulled down the data that they had. That data comes from the reporting of employers and also from tax returns, but it's not individualized, so you don't know who the individual people are. It's aggregated. So there are the kinds of creative workers that you would expect: actors, singers, photographers, painters, but there's also set and exhibition designers, music directors and composers, sound engineering technicians, craft artists, architects, etc. On a statewide basis, the most common type of creative worker is a photographer. There's over 16,000 people in Minnesota making their living as a photographer. And I was surprised by that. I thought it would be something else. But then I thought through it, and you have wedding photographers, you have people taking photographs for newspapers, videographers taking video for TV and online, and these days everything is so visual that when you kind of extend it out to all the possible industries that a photographer might be working in, it kind of makes more sense. Second is musicians and singers. Third is writers and authors, and fourth is graphic designers. We did a giant survey of artists in Minnesota. We asked about 80,000 artists to respond to an online survey. We got responses of over 2,000 individual artists. We needed about 800 to have statistically valid responses, so we feel very confident in the results. About 24% of the people who responded said that they're working full-time as an artist, 100% in their creative occupation. What's interesting is that 42% are working part-time in their creative occupation. And so that might be they're a reporter at the newspaper, but then they go home and they are painting, trying to win the duck stack competition, for example. Or my father-in-law, who's 93, he still goes to work every day to run a factory that makes things out of wood. In his spare time, he carves cowboys. And I keep accusing him of being an artist, and he just backs out and like, no, I'm not an artist. He's obviously an artist. He makes them from scratch. It comes out of his own imagination. And then about a third of the respondents were retired hobbyists and students, so they're not making a living in the arts at all. They're not included in the economic impact numbers, but I tell you, as one of the hobbyists, I spend about $1,000 a year on art supplies, so even we have some economic impact, but that's not counted here. All right. So we asked artists, what are the most important things that you need now as an artist to help you succeed making a living and a life as an artist? And the number one response all over the place was appropriate space to work. So people who are musicians, dancers, and theater artists, they need places to rehearse and they need places to perform. If they're a visual artist, jeweler, potter, they need dedicated studio space and the kind of equipment that they need to make their work. So space is really on the mind of artists in terms of trying to sort out how to solve that problem so they can set up what is very often a small business in order to make a living. Secondly, they really want to connect with each other and with their communities. Third, they really want to learn. And this was interesting because the responses of the older artists, folks over 50, they spent a lifetime acquiring skills as an artist. You know, maybe they're a metal worker, and they have had all kinds of interesting experiences where they've learned all the interesting different ways to weld and get different metals to connect to each other, etc. There are young artists, their hunger for learning new skills from older artists. And so there's an opportunity in Minnesota to connect the younger people who are hungry for new skills and the older people who want to pass on the skills that they've learned over a lifetime, so that these art forms can continue. And then artists, like everybody else, they want to earn more and they want to connect to larger audiences. In Morrison County, we found 395 people who are making their living full-time or part-time as an artist or creative worker in one of those 41 occupations. 245 of those are full-time. And what's interesting about that is in most counties, the part-time artist number is much larger than full-time. You guys are flipped compared to most other counties. In terms of density of the creative workers in the workforce, you guys are sort of in the middle. 24 artists and creative workers per 1,000 workers. Let's go back and look at that map. So you are the sort of teal color that is right dead center in terms of the rest of the state. But you can see that there's unexpected spots around the state with very high artist and creative worker density. And I'll give you an example. It's Cook County, which is the tip of the arrowhead. They have a very small population, only 6,000 people in the whole county, but their economy is very heavily dependent upon tourism. And not only are they bringing people there for events, music events and other things, but they have 2 art schools. So the North House Folk School and the Grand Marais Art Colony that draw people up for classes that last 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. And the customers are staying in the local hotels for the week. They're eating in restaurants for all their meals. They're going shopping downtown. So they're really building their economy on the work of these artists that live in the community. In terms of average hourly wages for creative economy workers, you guys are, very interestingly, your creative worker wages are way higher than the average worker wages in the county. Creative workers are making about $3 more than the average worker in all other occupations. And this is true in a lot of parts of greater Minnesota. Part of it is where the average worker wage is fairly low. The arts find an opportunity for an artist, creative worker, to have a wider geographic area for their business. So maybe they're a jeweler or a painter or somebody who makes things and sells them on Etsy.com, as somebody who's always buying stuff on Etsy.com, which is a place for handmade art. I'll buy stuff from all over the world on that website. The internet gives opportunities to artists for a much wider market than just in their hometown. Somebody who's running a wedding band, they may have a 10-county circumference that they are performing. So they're bringing dollars into the county that may not otherwise be there because of the nature of the works. Switching gears now to nonprofit arts and culture organizations. On a statewide basis, we found 1,601 statewide. In Morrison County, we find 16. 16 is kind of an average number for any particular county, but the makeup of your organizations is a little different than most places. In this slide, the organizations with the largest budgets are purple, so you can think of them as the lead organizations here. There are 10 arts organizations of various kinds, six of which are performing arts. On a statewide basis, the performing arts line is way longer than all of the other lines. There's way more performing arts organizations, whether they're singing groups, orchestras, theaters, that kind of thing, are much more common than arts multipurpose. Tends to be maybe a place where you can perform and also do art shows, kind of a mix of activities. And then you have 5 history and historical preservation organizations, which is very high for a single county. Most counties only have 1, maybe 2. Maybe they have their county historical society plus a historic house. You have 5, that's a lot for one county. So history has a very big footprint in this county. In terms of budget size, you also look very different from the statewide picture here also. On a statewide basis, the bottom rung, organizations whose annual budgets are under $25,000 a year, is about 6 times longer than all the other lines. That's just the most common budget size. It might be a group of citizens who get together once a year to throw a festival or an art show, and then otherwise they're not active. That's a very common way to organize. Here you have 4 organizations with budgets over $250,000 a year, and another 5 annual budgets of over $100,000. So your nonprofit arts and culture organizations are more mature and larger than would be typically seen in a single county of this size. On a statewide basis, we found 22 million attendees attending nonprofit arts and culture organizations on an annual basis, which is interesting because there's only 5.5 million people in Minnesota. So on average, every Minnesotan in the state is attending 4 events at a nonprofit arts and culture organization on an annual basis. Here in this county, we have 128,000 attendees served annually. Oh, the slide is wrong. You are 10th in population size amongst the 15 areas that we studied in this round. And so you would think with your county being 10th in population size, that the other numbers would align with that. You're actually 4th in attendance. So the numbers of your attendees are way higher than you would expect for a population of your size. And I took a look at the numbers in terms of the attendance. Of the 128,000 attendees in the county, about 60% of those are the arts organizations, 30% are the zoo, the, forget the name, Friends of Pine Grove Zoo, lots of attendees there, and then 22% art history. On a statewide basis, these nonprofit arts and culture organizations serve nearly 4 million kids, which is interesting also because there's only about 900,000 K-12 kids in Minnesota. So the kids, like the adults, are also getting on average 4 experiences at nonprofit arts and culture events annually. And what's fun about that number is that very often these experiences are free and funded by the Legacy Amendment. The Legacy Amendment passed in 2008 by a vote of the residents of Minnesota. It dedicated money to land, water, parks, and arts. And a lot of the activities that we're talking about today are funded out of the Arts Fund. In terms of students served here, not all organizations counted adults versus children, and so this is very much an undercount. We counted 2,500 kids being served by the organizations in this county, but I believe that number is much bigger just because most people were not tracking it that way, so it's hard to tell. We did a really big survey of audiences in Minnesota. It was a single sheet of paper. We gave you a piece of chocolate if you filled it out before you left the theater or the arts event. And we asked people, what zip code do you live in? So we could figure out if they were local people or non-local. And then a few other simple questions. And we found that 43% of attendees have an annual household income of under $60,000 a year. So there's this canard about the arts and culture that only rich people go. In Minnesota, it's a completely different picture. The nonprofit arts and culture organizations are serving the entire spectrum of the community. In this region, that's all of the counties that are served by the 5 Wings Regional Arts Council, attendees spend just short of $10 per person per event when they go to an arts and culture event. And about 20% of your audiences are non-local. So non-local means not just not from this county, but not from the entire region. So they're coming up from St. Cloud, or they're coming over from Moorhead, or whatever, about 20% of your audiences. When people are attending nonprofit arts and culture events, what are they spending money on? When I go out to a show, I'm going to a community theater, we always go out to dinner first. We make a night of it. So we go to a restaurant and we spend some money. We might buy gas on the way. At intermission, we might buy a souvenir. On the way home, we might stop at a bar or restaurant with friends to talk about what the great show was that we just saw. Maybe we hired babysitters. All these things add up. That's the $10 per person per event, and that's on average. So there's a lot of people that might just eat at home and not spend any money other than going to the show. But then you have these out-of-towners who are also staying in hotels, eating several times in restaurants. So that $10 figure is an average. The great thing about non-locals is that they're spending 80% more than the locals. So they're a very, very attractive population to bring into town to come see your arts events. I learned at an economic development conference in Fergus Falls last year that People in greater Minnesota are willing to drive up to 2 hours to go to an arts and culture event. So think of your audience as not just town, not just county, not even region, but how can you scoop people in to come to your events within a 2-hour radius? That's a pretty big market, and it might help really grow your audiences. Okay, so in terms of total economic impact of the arts and culture, we are counting 3 things. The direct spending of the nonprofit arts and culture organizations in town, the direct spending of the audiences that they're drawing, and then the spending of the artists that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So on a statewide basis, those 3 things add up to $2 billion annually. This makes Minnesota the epicenter of arts and culture in the Midwest. We have double the arts economy of Wisconsin, even though Wisconsin has about 5.5 million people too. We have basically the same population. We have double the arts economy. We have 10.5 times the arts economy of Kansas, 12.5 times that of South Dakota. So if you're a young creative person, you're probably loading up your crappy car and driving to Minnesota because this is where the cool creative jobs are. And that's a really great thing for Minnesota's future. That's what we want. We want young creative people here contributing to our economy and coming up with the next great big thing. So here's the raw numbers in terms of those 3 pieces that were added together for the statewide picture. $819 million for organization spending. There's no multipliers there. That's just adding up the total budgets. $564 million from spending, learned from those audience surveys. And then $644 million from artists and creative workers. Again, learned from a very large, over 2,000 people responded to a survey about their spending in their communities as artists, whether that's on studio space or buying paint and hardware at the local hardware store or whatever it may be that they're doing in the community to create their art. So how about Morrison County? Morrison County total economic impact is just short of $5 million annually. We have $2 million in organizational spending, $1.2 million in audience spending, and $1.5 million in artists and creative worker spending. And here's another interesting note on how this county is so unique. Again, 10th in population amongst the 15 study areas. It's wrong on this slide, it's 10th. You're ranked 5th in organizational spending, reflecting that you have a lot of organizations with bigger budgets than you would expect in a county of this size. And you're 6th in economic impact from organization and audience spending together. I'll wait for you to take that picture. So what kind of government revenue is all this spending in the community doing? Between income taxes, sales taxes, license fees, utility fees, filing fees, etc., it's just short of $500,000 in state and local government revenues altogether. And that's great news because we're always trying to convince local governments, economic development authorities to take the arts activities seriously in terms of an economic driver. And I'm pretty sure that the arts are generating way more government revenue than the county or city or economic development authority is investing in the arts right now. So good to know there's a good payoff. And then finally, switching gears just a little bit again, we collected some statewide and national public opinion polling about the nonprofit arts and culture, and again found some pretty unique things about Minnesota. Minnesotans value the arts to a much higher degree than people of other states. We have 91% believing that people who create art are contributing something important to the communities in which they live. We have 90% of the population believing the arts and culture activities help to make Minnesota an attractive place to live and work. From the artist survey, we found something interesting. Artists volunteer much more in their communities than other Americans. 88% report that they are volunteering for free in their communities. That's compared to all Minnesotans at 35%, and we have this great reputation as a volunteer mecca. The Super Bowl stories in the paper were all about, we got an unbelievable amount of volunteers, and they all showed up, unlike all the other states where they volunteer but they don't show up. And then it showed, the survey showed 25% of all Americans volunteer. I think one of the things about this number of Minnesota artists is, Minnesota's artists are very connected to their communities, interested in civic activism, but I think are asked much too often to do things for free. They, like everyone else, have mortgages and kids, they have to put food on the table, they need to make car payments, and people are constantly dunning them to do things for free. I'd like everybody to rethink that. If you want an artist at your event, If you're going to have a place to display art, you should figure out a way to pay the artist, at least some stipend. If you're paying a caterer, you should pay the artist, they're also a worker. A couple more. Minnesotans attend arts and culture events more often than other Americans. 76% to 68% report that they do attend. And then finally, Minnesotans themselves are more personally involved in creative activities in their daily lives than other Americans. 63% to 49% report that they themselves are artists. It's often said that choirs are to Minnesota what football is to Texas. So who in the audience sings in a choir? Church choir, other kinds of choir? Well, we have a few. My guess is there's folks here today even who, although they are doing artistic activities, don't think of themselves as an artist. They're just not just used to thinking that way. But you are definitely part of the artist population in terms of participating in the arts in your daily lives. So we're at the end of the highlights of the research. You can, as I said, get all of this research for free at creativemn.org. I have a one-pager that has all the data you can take home with you today. And I don't know if we should do a little Q&A now or have the other speakers and then do Q&A. What would you like to do, Mary?
Let's do a few remarks now, and then from our folks that we have lined up,
All right.
and then we'll have questions and answers. So let's see. I know I have Julia from Linden Hill. I have Melissa from the Lindbergh site. I have Jill from Great River Arts, and Mark from Five Wings Arts Council. If you want to just come up and say just a few words about how you think that this information is important to you and your organization. So let's start with Julia.
I'm starting to take one for the team. Well, I think I can speak for probably all of us in saying that that was just really great to be able to see that kind of information laid out. And like you were saying, the idea is that this is the really specific, the things that we can put down as we know that these are the numbers that are coming across. So then you think, what about the things that we didn't consider? Think about those things that maybe didn't quite fall into that line, and yet there's huge potential for that to be making influence and impact in our community in an even larger way. So I think that's something that's just really great to be able to see off the bat. On behalf of Linden Hill, I know that we're excited to have a little understanding about how we, as a part of our county and a part of our community, are contributing to our economy and into our local community. That idea of when a part of a community gives back, well, the community has also been very good to its nonprofits, its historical sites, its arts and cultural sites, and we can see also that those dollars are reflecting that. I think that's something to be proud of as a community and as a county. We're excited for the community to have a bit of insight and understanding about the value of our community organizations. Not everyone is a specific site that was a part of this, and that's something interesting too. I like the idea and to consider that even if somebody doesn't walk through the doors of a site or walk through the entrance to a program or an event, they are impacted by our being here. And that's huge. That idea that the economy is stronger because we exist is great for us to know. I think sites that work in this kind of thing, we get that we're important part of the community. We get that we're contributing to it, but it's sometimes difficult to articulate. So this is a great aspect for us to be able to consider. And so that idea that we have this reach into the community, we know that it's enriching our community, and not only that, I think this confirms that it's also a part of its life and breath.
Okay, we'll have Jill come next. We'll kind of go back and forth between arts and history.
So I'm really encouraged, and I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, because this has been on my mind for quite a while. I've been at Great River Arts for 6 years now, and have seen a lot of interesting change and growth over that 6 years. Most of which is to the positive. And what I really like about this is this helps encourage me to go back to my job day after day after day, because I know that now, I mean, here it is, it's obvious, it is making a difference, and it does matter. And even sometimes when we're trying to figure out what the next thing our community wants or needs, or what, you know, how do we get kids in the door for this art class, and that's the small thinking, like, you know, we can get stuck in that. I think that small thinking, like, you know, this one little project didn't go well, or this one little thing, but overall, if we can keep our sights on the big picture, which is what this is to me, I feel like it's a really good sign and a really clear message that what we're doing is making a difference. It does matter, we do contribute. And I know for us, the businesses around us, we're lucky to be in downtown. And we're lucky to be able to collaborate and partner with some of the local establishments downtown. And that impact is a really obvious one right away, because what happens for our dinner theater is we have Black and White, our great restaurant downtown. We partner with them, and all of a sudden, their business on the 12 nights in a year that we have dinner theater, their business is booming, because not only do they get to stay open and have their restaurant open, they're serving our patrons as well. So it boosts their business for those times, along with events that we have catered. The list goes on for what we can partner. And then in addition to that, we also have the Rustic Saloon, just a few doors down from us, who happens to be a sponsor of ours, our primary sponsor. And again, on the back of all of our tickets, we get to say, hey, drink special at the Rustic Saloon. So after the show tonight or during intermission, go down and have a drink and give them support. And they love it. They absolutely, they always say, we know when Great River Arts has something going on, because all of a sudden, on a Thursday night, which is normally quiet for them, they got booming business. So, it's those kinds of things, those are kind of things that we can measure quantitatively, but and just like this is, but in my world on a daily basis, I don't always get that. But it's just nice. So thank you to have a big picture like this, because it does encourage me, and it does sort of inspire me to keep going. And as most of us that work in the nonprofit sector in small town Minnesota, it some days is not easy. So keep plugging away, because it's worth it.
Okay, now we'll talk to Melissa Peterson from Lindbergh House and Museum.
These results are really exciting to me. We're one of the smaller sites as part of the Minnesota Historical Society, so I often wonder, compared to like Split Rock, what impact are we making? And it shows that we are making a difference in this community, and so this is great things for me to pass on to my supervisors to continue to have that funding come from the state via our appropriation into Morrison County, into Little Falls. I would argue that these numbers are higher, because I don't know how my staff fits into your creative worker numbers. Where does like a tour guide fit in? Does that fit in under your 41
They have
jobs?
to be in the list of 41.
Yeah, so I didn't see anything that's like that. So it's like, I would argue these numbers are higher, because that doesn't take any of my staff in direct account.
Your entire budget is included?
Yeah.
So all of your staff wages are included?
Okay, perfect, because it's just like, these are creative workers, but they're not artisans and stuff like that. So, but to professionalize what a tour guide is, that these are people who pour their heart and soul into things. And with our audience, we are one of the ones pulling in from the Twin Cities metro area. So we don't really hit our local audience as hard as I'd like to, working on that, but we are bringing in that outside audience into our county. And it's just great to see that, as people wonder, well, how does this make a difference? Now we have the evidence to show them how this makes a difference, and that these are important places to have in our community. So
we'll put Mark Turner from Five Wings Arts Council on the spot.
Well, thanks, Mary. And first of all, kudos for the Morrison County history, arts, and cultural organizations that put this together. They are very validating numbers for us. We're a regional arts council, so we're public stewards of funding. We deal a lot with mostly that more subjective type of stuff and working with community development for art's sake. But we all know that arts are a big part of community development, and now validating the numbers is a big part of economic development. They all work hand in hand. So again, kudos to Mary and the group for putting all this together. There's a lot of data that goes into this stuff. Sheila can attest to that. And putting my administrator hat on right now, so it tells all of our groups that actually we give funding to. It's very important we keep accurate numbers, accurate audience counts, because they all go into these numbers that go to the better good. So keep up the good work. Very proud of you guys, and we're going to use these numbers to keep on marching on. Advocacy Day is March 6th, so I'd encourage everybody to, I'm sure Sheila will do a pitch for this too, but come on down for Advocacy Day. So keep up the good work.
And I'll just reiterate what many of the others have said. We know intuitively all of our sites are making a difference, but boy, in our society, it's the hard measurements that tend to make the argument for us. So now we have some hard numbers, and we're very pleased about that. So I think we'll do a little Q&A at this point, so we'll let Sheila come up and run that.
So was there anything that surprised you that you really did not expect to hear today?
The average hourly wage.
Average hourly wages, yeah, that's really interesting. There, on the Creative Minnesota website, there's a map that shows by color whether the creative worker wages are higher or lower in all of Minnesota's counties. And it's true in almost all of rural Minnesota, not true in the large cities and the regional centers. And it's also not true in the Iron Range, and I have yet to figure out why the Iron Range sticks out, having higher average worker wages than creative worker wages. But in greater Minnesota, that is the norm. But the difference in your two wages are, it's a much bigger distance. $3 difference per hour is a lot more than most places.
Can you clarify that $10 an hour, or $10, I'm sorry, per audience member that's spent? Does that include ticket prices, or is that?
Nope, the $10 spent per audience person is not including the cost of their ticket, and it's an average of all the people who responded to the survey. So some people are spending $20, some people are spending none, but on average it's about $10. And I have to say that's pretty low compared to other regions. It very much depends on what kind of events you are surveying. I'm not sure what the complement of organizations were that did the surveying this time, but it surprised me that it was so low, because it's usually more closer to $20 per person per event. Yes?
So, at the beginning when you were going over the 41 kind of disciplines that make up artistic jobs, I saw music directors, choir directors.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include educational professionals who, like a choir director at a school?
It includes a choir director at a church or a school. It doesn't include all arts teachers unless the teaching involves making art. So there's a kind of a fine line drawn there. And that's the way it's constructed in the federal data. In the federal data, you're either a teacher or somebody making their living as an artist/teacher. They look at them differently.
And so these 41 disciplines are federal?
Yeah, they're federal occupations that we pull down from federal data. Yeah.
So one of the things that impressed me was the amount of tax dollars that are leveraged through our nonprofits. So we hear nonprofit and think we're just tax-free and we pay no taxes, but we actually do.
Right, so all these nonprofits have employees and they're paying the payroll taxes and, all the things that you must do as an employer. Not all purchases are tax-free. Some nonprofits can purchase things tax-free, some can't, depending on how they're organized, so it's kind of a mix. Yeah. Yes?
This is for current times, 2016, what was the number that you're basing this off of?
The data is from 2014.
2014,
A few of the organizations, their data might be more current because it was all that was available, but the target year was 2014.
Has anything like this been done before? I'm curious if there's an ability to note if this is changing much or anything?
As far as I know, this is the only study of its kind done for Morrison County. Minnesota Citizens for the Arts has been doing these studies for decades of various kinds.
And have you looked at those? Has that changed statewide much, do you know, or?
Well, yesterday, I sat down and looked at the 2006 study and compared
I'm glad
it
you
to the-
staged that question with me before.
Yeah. I sat down and compared a variety of questions from the 2006 report, 2006, to the 2017 study because people are interested in knowing what the impact of the legacy amendment has been. So I looked at the number of organizations that are known. It doesn't mean that they did not exist in 2006, it's just that the data wasn't collected, we didn't know they were there. The known organizations has tripled. The economic impact of the nonprofit arts and culture organizations has doubled. The attendance has more than doubled since the legacy amendment was passed. Government revenues, I think, are up by 1/3 from the sector as a whole. Gee, I should have brought those with me because it was super interesting, but I only just pulled the data yesterday in response to a question from the legislators, so.
Thanks.
Yes?
What kind of a list did you use? Where'd you get the names of the people you sent the survey to?
For which data set?
All of them?
All right, for the audience surveying, each regional arts council was responsible for collecting, I can't remember what the goal was, 500 to 750 responses per region. So on a statewide basis, there were some 6,000 responses from the audience surveys. That gives us audience spending, income levels of the audience, whether the audience is local or non-local, all those questions. For the individual artist survey, we got 2,100 responses from Minnesota's artists statewide. We got enough responses from every single region to have statistically valid information for each region. So that is artist spending, full-time, part-time question, do you volunteer, a whole bunch of set of questions. Then for the nonprofit arts and culture organizations, we had to do the footwork of actually calling and harassing organizations in the study area to give us their audience figure and their annual spending figure, and if they had it, how many children served. And then from that, we used underlying economic modeling for each region, which was produced for a previous study, and put the numbers through the calculations to get the economic impact, government revenues, FTE supported, and all those kind of things.
Okay, so.
Have I answered your question yet?
Not exactly. If you went to the state of Minnesota artist something and got a list of artists, that's who you pulled in the survey?
No.
Okay, so.
The individual artist survey was done in a collaboration with a couple hundred nonprofit arts and culture organizations across the state who work with artists.
Okay, that's fine.
We asked each organization to promote to their own list, whether it was potters or writers or singers or dancers or actors or whoever it is that they work with, asking them to complete this study, which was an online study for us over a 6-month period. So, we got there?
Well, you know, my husband makes lighted wine bottles and he wasn't asked.
Well,
So wouldn't he be an artist?
spiritually, he's included.
I can,
Enough people responded that we got good hard data on the sector as a whole. So whether or not a single artist responded or not is not really relevant to the whole data set.
however,
However,
if they would like to be included, make sure that Five Wings Arts Council has their name and contact information, and we will make sure that they get the survey next time Sheila sends it out.
The reason I ask is that I'm sure there's lots of people that are missed, so that there could even be bigger numbers.
we want lots of responses so we get good averages. So the numbers would not have grown in terms of economic impact because we were looking for an average for the 104,000 artists we found in the federal data. So lots of responses is awesome because it makes our numbers more solid, but lots of responses would not have increased the numbers. Yes?
I was wondering what the correspondence is between or among the counties who, like Morrison County, as you've reported, are doing very well, and their
My guess is this county is pulling down more legacy dollars than other counties of similar population because you have more organizations and quite a healthy group of artists who are potentially eligible for grants and thus pulling them down. I don't have a county by county analysis of grants. I'm sure that Mark has some for the region, but that would only be for the arts and the arts grants. It wouldn't include the history grants and the public broadcasting and the children's museum and the zoos and all that other stuff, because they're all separate systems. This is great. You guys have asked better questions than anywhere else I've been. Like, I actually got down into data sources. Way to go. Anything else? All right, it sounds like we're good. Those of you who are with arts organizations, if you could stay after just for a minute. For Arts Advocacy Day, we want to put out a photo on Twitter and social media saying, look, all these artists got together for this study today. So if you could stay just a minute for a picture, it would be great. Thank you so much. It was a joy to work with the team, Mary and the rest of the folks who worked on the study, and go forth and be creative. Here's a copy of the one-pager for the county.